Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to lecture number 13 of the subject Business Law. Today's topic is Law of Partnership Part 2. I am Dr. Rama Bansal, working as Assistant Professor at Arya College, Ludhiana, and this is a DTH Swayam Prabha MHRD New Delhi sponsored project. In today's topic, we are going to discuss doctrine of implied authority, liability of a firm and its partners to a third party, reconstitution of partnership firm, under which we are going to study admission of partner, retirement of a partner, expulsion of a partner, insolvency and death of a partner, and at last we will discuss about the dissolution of the firm. So let's start with the first topic. First, the topic is doctrine of implied authority. What is the doctrine of implied authority? This is being covered by Section 19 of Indian Partnership Act, which explains it as the act of the partner which is done to carry on in the usual way business of the kind carried on by the firm, binds the firm. The authority of the partner to bind the firm conferred by this section is called his implied authority. In other words, the act by which a partner can bind its firm in the routine business of the partnership firm is called as the implied authority of a partner. It means the firm is bound by the acts done by its partner, which are being done in the routine business of the firm, which are being done in the usual way to carry on the business of the firm. In other words, when a partner has the capacity to bound the partnership firm by its acts, it means this is the implied authority of an partner. The firm would be liable only if the few conditions are being fulfilled. Among those conditions, the first condition is the act of the partner must be in the type of business carried on by the firm. That means the activity which the partner is doing must be the part of the business. The act must be done in the usual way. It should not be done in an extraordinary manner. It should be the part of the routine business of the firm. The act must be done in the name of the firm. When a partner do something, if it is being done on his personal behalf, this is not the implied authority of the partner, because by this name, by his individual name, he cannot bind the firm. But if he uses the name of the firm while doing any activity, it would bind the firm, so it would cover under the implied authority of a partner. The nature of business, customs, etc. must be known before deciding the acts of a partner which can bind a firm. A same activity done may be under the implied authority of the partner, or may not be under the implied authority of a partner. It would depend upon the type of the business, nature of the business, and the different customs of that business, which would decide that a particular activity is to be covered under the implied authority of a partner or not. In case of a trading business, let's see the example. The firm deals in sale and purchase of goods. So, an act of the partner to borrow money may be in his implied authority. As this example says, if we have a trading business, and in that trading business, the partners have to do the sale and purchase of the goods. And for doing this sale and purchase of the goods, if a partner borrows the money for the same purpose, it is covered under the implied authority. But in case of non-trading business, such activity of borrowing money may not be covered under the implied authority of a partner. Let's see the example. A and B were carrying on a banking business in partnership. A received a certain sum of money on behalf of the firm, but B did not know anything about the money received by A and he used the money for his personal benefits. In this case, the firm is liable for the money received by A as it was received in the usual course of the business of the firm. No doubt the money is being used for the personal benefits, but the money which was received, that was received on the behalf of the firm, means the name of the firm was used and the money was received in the usual course of the business. That means it was a routine activity of the partnership business. So all the conditions in this example are being satisfied to include an activity into the implied authority of a partner. So in this example, the firm would be liable for the money received by A on the behalf of the firm. Regarding partners' implied authority to borrow money, following judicial decisions are important to know, where the different judicials has given the different kind of decisions. First is the partner of a firm carrying business of commission agent have no implied authority to borrow. This decision was given in the case of Balaji Finance Corporation versus R. Venu Gopal. And in another case of SN Soni versus Tawfiq Farooqi, the court decided that the partners of a finance company have the implied authority of endorsing a promissory note of the firm. And a different kind of decision was given in case of R Sons versus Padmavati, in which the court says that the firm of engineering contractor is a non-trading firm. In case of general commercial nature, following acts are within the implied authority of a partner. That means when it is a general commercial nature of the business, we include the following activities into the implied authority of the partners. One is he may pledge or sell the partnership property. He has the right to buy goods on account of partnership as the business is to as the business may be to buy or to sell the goods. So in this case, in the general commercial nature business, the partner has the capacity to buy goods on the account of the firm. He may borrow money, contract debts, and pay debts. He may make, draw, or accept the negotiable instruments on the behalf of the firm. And any act done within the scope of the implied authority of the partner, but for his own personal purpose, as I have already said, any activity done under the implied authority of the partner, but the activity was done for the own personal purpose of the partner would not bind the firm. It would not be considered as the implied authority of the partner on the behalf of the partnership firm. But the payment by a partner for his personal debt from the funds of the firm does not bind the firm too, because the money is used for the personal purpose of the partner. That means we can say if any activity is being done on the personal behalf or the personal purpose of the partner, it would not be binding upon the firm. It cannot be described under the implied authority of the partners. What are the acts which are being included in the implied authority of the partners? The one is to engage a lawyer and defend the action brought against the firm. If any action is being done against the firm and the partner has engaged a lawyer to defend that case, and for that case if the partner has to spend any kind of money, so that would be considered under the implied authority of the partner to pay that charges. To purchase goods of the kind that are used in the business of the firm, to engage servants to perform the business of the firm, because the partners has to run the business, and to run that business, if the partner of the firm engages any servant to perform the business of the firm, this is being counted under the implied authority of that partner. If the partner has to receive payments of the debts due to the firm and give receipts for the same, this is again under the implied authority. To settle accounts with the person dealing with the firm, Settle account means if the firm has to pay or if the firm has to receive some money from the other party, the partners has the authority to settle all those accounts and to sell the goods of the firm on the behalf of the firm. That means anything which is being done in the usual manner for the name of the firm, for the benefit of the firm, done by the partner is counted under the implied authority of the partner. Basically, the nature of the firm should be taken in care when we decide that any act is under the implied authority or not of a partner. What are the acts that are being counted as outside the implied authority of the partners? So, there are certain restrictions imposed on the implied authorities, which makes the activities outside the implied authority of the partners. These are being discussed as under. One is the statutory restrictions. Some restrictions are being imposed by the Indian Partnership Act itself on the partners, that are known as the statutory restrictions, and these restrictions are being covered under section 19 subsection 2. An implied authority of a partner does not empower him to do what? One, to submit a dispute relating to business of a firm, to open a banking account on behalf of the firm in his own name. If any partner opens any account on the behalf of the firm, it is under the implied authority. But if that account of the firm is being opened at the name of the partner, this can never be under the implied authority of the partner. This is outside the implied authority. To compromise any claim or portion of claim by the firm, if any compromise in any claim is to be done, that is to be done by the firm at the name of the firm. Only a single partner cannot compromise any kind of claim or a portion of claim by the firm. To withdraw a suit filed on behalf of the firm, if in any case the firm has filed any suit, and only a partner cannot withdraw a suit without the permission of all the partners. If it is being done, it would be counted as the act outside the implied authority of a partner. To admit any liability in a suit or proceedings against the firm. If someone has sued the firm and a partner admits any liability in that suit or the proceedings against the firm without the consent of all other partners, that means it is the act done out of the implied authority of a partner. To acquire immovable property on behalf of the firm. No partner can acquire the immovable property on the behalf of the firm. It is the firm's name which is to be used to acquire the immovable property. To transfer the immovable property, as in case of acquiring the immovable property, same the immovable property cannot be transferred on the behalf of the firm by any partner. And to enter into partnership on behalf of the firm, no partner has the authority to enter into the partnership on the behalf of the firm. That means if a partner has to enter into a partnership, he has to take the permission of all the other partners, and he cannot enter he cannot make the firm entered into a new partnership at his own will. So all these restrictions are being imposed on the partners by the partnership act itself. Second type of restrictions are being imposed by the partnership deed. As we have already discussed, what is the meaning of partnership deed? That means partnership deed is that document which contains all the rules and the conditions of the partnership. So some restrictions may be imposed by the partnership deed. So among those, the first one, which is covered under section 20 of Indian Partnership Act, and explains that implied authority of the partner may also be restricted by an agreement between them. That means if all the partners make an agreement that this particular task is not to be done by the partners, that means it would be outside the authority of the partners. However, the firm would be liable for such restricted act if the person dealing with the firm has no knowledge of such restrictions. Let's say the partners has made an agreement that a particular transaction is not to be done by any partner, and the party with whom the contract was made, which was outside the firm, don't have any idea that the partners have such kind of agreement between them, and in absence of that knowledge, the party makes a contract with the partner, so that for that act the firm would held liable. Let's see the example. A and B were partners in a firm. The firm was carrying on the business of garages and repairing the cars. Partnership agreement provided that partners shall not buy or sell their cars on behalf of the firm. A sold a second-hand car to which the firm had no title. Later on, when buyer came to know that firm had no title, he claimed the amount from B, the other partner. It was held that B was liable to pay the amount as buyer did not know anything about such restrictions. So, as in this example, the contract is being done by A, and there was a mutual agreement between both the partners that they would not buy or sell any car on behalf of the firm. But when the partner A has done it, and the other party to whom the car was sold don't know about the facts of this agreement, so in that case the firm would be liable for the sale of the car. In case of statutory restrictions, the firm is not liable whether the person dealing with the firm has knowledge of the restrictions or not. But in case of partnership deed, if the other party don't know about the restrictions imposed, the firm would be held liable. So, up to now, we have discussed what do we mean by the implied authority of a partner. Now we come to the liability of a firm and its partner to a third party. Means, do the partnership firm has any liability to the third parties, or the partners of a partnership firm has any liability to the third parties? So in that, the first liability is liability for wrongful acts of a partner, which is covered under section 26. So under this, we will say the firm is liable for all the wrongful acts of a partner. As we know, partner has the capacity to bind the firm by its acts. So if any partner do some wrongful act, so for that wrongful act of any partner, the firm would be liable. And the firm would be liable only when this act was done in the ordinary course of business. If the partner has done something extraordinary and it was not a routine part of the business, the firm cannot be held liable. And again, when the wrongful act which the partner has done, that was also done with the authority of all the partners, so only then the firm would be liable. When we say the wrongful act means anything done under the fraud or with the negligence of the partners. Let's see the example. A and B were partners in a firm. They were carrying on the business of buying and selling the wine. C, a wine merchant, employed the firm of A and B for buying and selling the wine on commission basis. C gave a sum of money to the firm for the same. A gave the false accounts of purchase and sale to C and misappropriated the money. So the firm was held liable to pay the money to C because it was done under the wrongful act. Next, we will discuss the case of Hamilton versus John Hodgson and Company to prove this point. A and Company and B and Company. There were two companies, A and Company and B and Company, were two separate firms which were carrying on competing business. A partner of A and Company, bribed B, a clerk of B and Company, and induced him to give secret information about the price and customers of B and Company. Due to supply of this information, B and Company suffered a loss in the business, and B and Company brought an action against A and Company for the recovery of the loss suffered by them. So it was held that A and Company was liable to pay the amount of loss to B and Company as A's acts was done within the implied authority, because it was the usual for the person engaged in that kind of business to obtain secret information from their competitors. So all the points here, the one partner of A and company, that is has bribed to the another person B of B and company, which is a wrongful act. But this act was being done in the usual manner of the business, and it was done on the name of the firm. So all the conditions are being fulfilled, and it was a wrongful act, and for this act the firm would be liable. Second liability is liability for misapplication of money or property by a partner. If a partner misappropriates any money belonging to the third party by using the name of the firm, would held liable for the same. Section 27 of Indian Partnership Act explains the rules regarding this. One, where money or property is received by a partner, then that misapplication misapplied by the same partner. That means the person who has received the money or property has misapplied that property or money, or this money or property is received by the firm and is misapplied by the partner. Whatever the case is, in both of the cases, the firm would held liable. In short, if any money is being received by a firm or received by a partner and is being misapplied by a partner in the usual course of the business, in both cases, the firm would held liable. In the first case, that means when the money or property was received by the partner and misapplied by the partner, is done under the implied authority of the partner. Whereas in second case, money was received in the course of the business and misapplied by the another partner, that any firm cannot receive the money at its owns, it works through its partners. So this principle works here. So in both of these cases, the firm would held liable to the third party for the money or property received. We can clear this point more with the help of the example. A and B are partners as solicitors. C, a client of the firm, gave some money to pay for investing in a specific security. A did not invest the money but misappropriated it to his own use. C filed a suit against the firm for the recovery of money which he has given to A, so it was held that the firm was liable for the same. But when the act was done in the ordinary course of the business of the firm, then all partners would become liable. So, see the case of Devyans versus Nobel. A, B, and C were partners in a firm of brokers. B, a customer of the firm deposited his ornament with the firm for safe custody. A and B sold this ornament and misappropriated the money. C, being a sleeping partner, did not know anything about this act of A and B filed a suit against the firm, including all the three partners. So it was held that all the three partners were liable for full value of the ornament. So whether any partner, as in this case, C is a sleeping partner, whether any partner knows about the act of the other partners or not, but when it is done under the ordinary course of business, then all the partners would held liable. Where the act was done by the partner and not under the ordinary course of the business, then the firm cannot be held liable for any misappropriation done by the partner. Means when the act is done under the ordinary course, the firm is liable. When the act is not done under the ordinary course of the business of the firm would not be liable for any kind of misappropriation. Let's see the example. A, B, and C were partners in a firm carrying on banking business. B, a customer of the firm, deposited with the firm a box containing securities for the safe custody. Afterwards, D authorized A only to take out some of the security and to replace them by others. While replacing the securities, A misappropriated some of them. So it was held that firm was not liable because B elected to D only with a particular partner and not with the firm. That means D has selected only a partner to do that particular task, to replace that some others. So but it was the D has not authorized the firm, D has authorized only a partner, and it was not done under the ordinary course of the business of the firm. So in this case the firm would not be held liable for the misappropriation of the money. Third is the liability by holding out. As we have learned so many times during our lectures, that a partner by holding out means when someone shows it that he is a partner in a firm, but the other person knowingly permits him to represent as a partner of the firm, but in actual he is not a partner in a firm. In such case, if any act is done by that holding person, holding out partner, the firm would be liable for that particular act. Let's see the example. A introduced B to C as his partner and B remained silent. In actual, B was not a partner in that firm, but when the B remained silent, so he worked as a holding out partner. In fact, A and B were not partners. In this case, B becomes a partner by holding out and can be held liable to the third parties for the acts of the firm, because the persons outside the firm treat him as a partner of the firm. But the following conditions must be satisfied under section 28 for making a person the partner in holding out. 1. There must be a representation by the person that he is a partner in the firm. The third party must have knowledge of representation made by that person. Means that representation can be made in the presence of that particular person, or the other party must be knowing that representation was made, and the third party must have acted on the faith of such representation. The third party has entered into a contract on the faith of that representation which was made by a partner in holding out. Only that person can enforce liability under this section to whom the representation was made. If the representation was made in journal, so only that person to whom that representation was made regarding the holding out partner, only that person can enforce the liability of that partner or that firm. Exceptions to holding out: the persons who are exempted out of this. One is the sleeping partner. A sleeping partner, as we have read in our previous lecture, sleeping partner is that partner who do not take the active participation in the business. So a sleeping partner after retirement cannot be held out for holding out. If a sleeping partner has taken the retirement either by age or by some voluntary reasons, he cannot be held liable for the holding out. Second, if his existence is not known to the outsider, the public notice regarding retirement is not required. As in case of other partners, when one partner retires from the firm, a public notice is being given. But when the public notice is not given, then the active partners, they remain liable. But in case of sleeping partners, if the public notice regarding the retirement of sleeping partner is not given, even then the firm would not be liable. Second is the case of the deceased partner. If any partner of the firm due to death now is not a partner of the firm, the estate or legal representatives of that deceased partner cannot be held liable for the acts done by the firm. Even if after the death, even if the name of the deceased partner appears in the name and affairs of the firm, even then that partner's legal estate or the legal representatives would not be held liable for the liability. Third one is the insolvent partner. If any partner is being declared as insolvent by the court, so from the date when he was declared insolvent, he would not be liable for any kind of liability of the firm. And even in case of insolvency of that partner, any kind of public notice is not required. So, up to now, we have discussed the liabilities of the partnership firm and liability of the partners to the outside third parties. Now we come to the next topic, that is the reconstitution of partnership firm. That means when there is any change in the constitution of the firm, so we say it is a reconstitution of the partnership firm. So under the reconstitution we will discuss the five heads, that is section 31, 32, 33, 34 and 35, which are regarding the admission of a partner, retirement of a partner, expulsion of a partner, insolvency of a partner and death of a partner. Let's start with the admission of a partner. When any person is being entered into an existing firm, when any partner is being admitted into an existing firm, this is being called as the admission of the partner. This coming partner is also known as this admission is known as known as incoming partner. Only when the all the existing partners are ready, have consented to make a person a partner in the partnership firm, only then that partner can be entered into the partnership firm. Because the partners who are already there, they have a relationship of trust and confidence, and when any person is being entered into a partnership firm, there is a danger to that trust and confidence. So upon a particular person, if all the partners can give the consent, means all the partners can show their trust and confidence, only then a partner can be admitted to an existing firm, and that such partner is known as the incoming partner. So when the new partner is being admitted, that can be admitted by the following ways. One is with the consent of all the partners. As I have already said, there is a relationship between the partners of trust and confidence. So with the consent of all the partners, the new partner can be admitted, or in accordance with the contract already entered into between the partners. That means if when the partnership deed was made, there was an agreement that whenever a new partner is to be admitted, there is no need to take the consent, any person can be admitted, or a certain person would be added, entered into the partnership firm after 5 years. So if such kind of agreement is there in the partnership deed, so now the consent of all the partners is not required, and a person can be admitted into the partnership business. Let's see the example. A partnership agreement between A and B contained a clause that they would have the right to bring his son C into partnership on attaining the age of 21 years. When C attained the age of 21 years, B refused to accept him as a partner. It was held that B could not do so, as the partnership agreement operated as a contract according to which new partner was admitted. That means a new partner was admitted according to the agreement which was being done priorly, and according to that, C is to be entered into the business on attaining of age of 21 year, and now B cannot refuse that he cannot be the partner of the firm. Partnership agreement may also empower certain partners to nominate a new partner. When the partnership agreement is being done, partnership deed is being done, so in that case, it may also empower that a partner, an existing partner, can nominate any other person as a new partner. Even this provision can be added. Where such nominated partners is not acceptable to all other partners, they cannot be enforced to enter into partnership with him. But here the case is different. When there was a prior agreement with a particular person, it was the enforcement on other partners to make him enter into the partnership firm. But when such nomination is being given by any person, and that nomination is not acceptable to all other partners, so that partner cannot be entered as a new partner into the existing firm. So when a new partner is being entered into a partnership firm, it has a few liabilities. One, liability for the acts of the firm done before admission. Means the all the acts which was done before the admission of a new partner, for all those acts an incoming partner cannot be held liable. Let's see the example. A and B were partners in a firm. C was the creditor of the firm. After some time, D, a new partner, was admitted into the firm. In this case, they will not be liable to make payment of the debt due to C because D has entered later on and C was the creditor of the firm and the transaction was done before the entering of the D into the partnership firm. So, in this case, D cannot be held liable. But an incoming partner can be held liable in the following conditions. One, the reconstituted firm has assumed the liability for past debts of the old firm. When there was a reconstitution of the partnership firm, the new partnership firm has made an agreement that they are liable for the past debts of the old partnership. So in that case, if such kind of agreement is there, the new constituted firm would be liable for the debts of the old firm, and the creditors were also informed about the new agreement. So when all these conditions are being satisfied, a newly entered partner can be held liable for the past debts of the firm. Liability for the acts of the firm done after admission. Once the partner is being admitted, he must be liable for the acts done by the firm. He would be liable he would be liable for all the acts which the firm has done after the admission of that particular partner. Let's see the example. A and B were partners in a firm. After some time, C, a new partner, was admitted into the firm. Thereafter, the reconstituted firm purchased some raw material from D on credit. So, in this case, C along with A and B would also be liable to D for the price of the raw material. That means he is now a regular partner of the firm, and any transaction which is being done after the entrance of that partner, that means that is a usual affair of the company, and all the partners would be held liable for that particular activity. Next, retirement of a partner. In second part, we are going to discuss. Section 232 defines that a partner may retire when all the partners are willing that one person can retire, or where there is an express agreement by the partners that any person can be retired at any time, or by giving notice in writing to all the partners that a particular partner wants to retire. In short, when a person wants to retire, that can be retired by the consent of all, by an express agreement, or by giving the notice to all the other partners that a particular person wants to get retired. So let's see the case. In case of Vishnu Chandra versus Chandrika Agrawal, the Supreme Court has held that an agreement which permitted a partner to retire by 1 month notice was valid. So means in this case, if any person wants to retire from a firm, a 1 month notice is okay. Means by giving the 1 month notice, a partner can retire from the firm anytime. So in a two-member firm, there is no question of retirement because for the partnership, two members are always required. But where there are only two members into a partnership firm, and the retirement of one person will make the firm into the dissolution. So in that case, there is no retirement of a partner when there are only two members into a firm. Now, what is the liability of the retiring partner? As we know, once the person is retired, any act done before his retirement, the person would remain liable, and he would be liable up to that date up to which he was the member of the partnership firm. He was the partner in the partnership firm, and once he is being retired, and after his retirement, if any act is being done, he is not responsible. Let's see the example. A, B, and C were partners in a firm. D was the creditor of the firm. After some time, A retired from the firm, but B and C carried on the business of the firm even after A's retirement. In this case, A along with B and C remains liable to make payment of the debt to D because the D has become the creditor when A was the member of the partnership firm. Means this activity was done before the retirement of Mr. A. So that means any debt due to D would be paid by the three partners, that is A, B, and C. Liability for the acts of the firm done after retirement. Means once the partner has been retired, and if any act is being done by the partners after the retirement of that person, so in this case the partner who is going to retire has to give the public notice of his retirement. If such a notice is being not given, in that case that person would remain liable even after the retirement for the acts of the firm. But there is an exception in case of sleeping partner. A sleeping partner would not be made liable for the acts of the firm even he do not give the public notice of his retirement. Let's discuss the case of Glorious Plastic Company versus Legate Enterprises. The Bombay High Court has held that where the existence of a retiring partner was not known, he cannot be held liable for the debts incurred by the firm after his retirement, even if public notice of his retirement was not given. So that means if any person who was the partner of the partnership firm and was not known to the public, means if the person was a sleeping partner, the person was not known to the public, in that case there is no need of giving the retirement notice. But in case of active partners, the notice regarding the retirement is the must. Now, the rights of a retiring partner: right to carry on competing business. The retiring partner can start a new business, the competing business. Even the retiring partner can start a new business to the next door of the reconstituted firm. Nobody can stop him. And he may also advertise for such business because he is opening a new business. He is not now the part of the partnership firm. Nobody can stop him for advertising. The interest of the reconstituted firm should be protected. So, for that reason, a certain restrictions can be imposed on the retiring partner. One, he would not use the name of the firm because the partner is not now the member of the partnership firm, partner of the partnership firm. So, he would not use the name of the firm. He cannot represent that he is carrying on the business of the firm. He cannot solicit the existing customers of the firm. So all these conditions, all these restrictions can be imposed by a reconstituted firm on the retiring partner. Second right is right to share subsequent profits. If any act was done before the retirement of the partner and the result of that act is in the form of the profits, so that means that subsequent profits is the right of the retiring partner. He has the right on them and he can claim them. On retirement, it is a duty of the remaining partners that they should settle the accounts with the retiring partners. And in case they do not settle the account, the retiring partner can exercise either of the following rights. Means in case of default made by the reconstituted partners of the reconstituted partnership firm, the retiring partner has a few rights. One, he may receive interest at the rate of 6% per annum on the amount of his share in the property of the firm, or he may demand such share of profit as may be attributable to the use of his share of property of the firm. He has the right on the subsequent share of the profits. Third point to discuss is the expulsion of a partner. Normally, a partner cannot be expelled from the partnership firm. The other partners don't have a right to expel any partner, but it can be done in some exceptional cases by following a prescribed procedure. Section 33, subsection 1 of Indian Partnership Act defines that a partner may not be expelled from a firm by any majority of the partner save in the exercise in good faith of powers conferred by a contract between the partner. Say if the majority of the partners wants that any partner must be expelled from the partnership firm, even they don't have that right. A partner can be expelled only if the following conditions would be satisfied. One, there is an express contract between the partners. That means when the partnership deed was made, there was an express contract between the partners that with the majority or with the voting power, a partner may be expelled from the firm. Only then it can be done. Power of expulsion should be exercised by majority of partners, in that case only when there is an express contract, and should be exercised in absolute good faith. That means the express contract would be applicable only when the majority of the partners are expelling to another partner only in the good faith. That means they are doing for the benefit of the firm, not for their personal reasons. Next point is the insolvency of the partner. Section 34 subsection 1 defines that when a partner in a firm is adjudicated and insolvent, he ceases to be a partner on that day. That means from the day when the partner is being adjudicated as insolvent, he would be out of the partnership firm. He cannot be held liable for the activities of the firm done by the firm after that particular date. So let's complete the definition. When a partner in a firm is adjudicated as insolvent, he ceases to be a partner on the date on which the order of adjudication is made, whether or not the firm is thereby dissolved. Means one partner is being declared as insolvent, the other partners may continue with the partnership firm. There is no necessity that partnership firm should be dissolved. So the firm in that case is automatically dissolved if there in due to insolvency in contract of contrary. If such kind of express contract is there, that means if one person gets insolvent, the firm would be dissolved, then it is there. But otherwise, in contract of contrary, the firm need not to be dissolute. But where the firm is not dissolved, the effect of insolvency would be there, which would be as the estate of insolvent partner is not liable for the acts of the firm done after the insolvency of the partner. Means once the partner is insolvent, he would not be liable for the acts of the firm, and the firm would also not be liable for the acts done by the insolvent partner, even under the implied authority done after the date of the insolvency. Reason being, he would not be the partner of the partnership firm from the date of the insolvency. The last point in the reconstitution is the death of the partner. When there is a death of a partner, the other partners may opt for dissolution of the firm. But when they opt for continuing of the partnership firm, there must be some reconstitution in the firm's partnership deed. So, in contract to contrary, when there is a death of partner, the firm would stand automatically dissolved. But when the firm is not dissolved, but the estate of deceased partner would never be liable for the acts of the firm done by the firm after the death of the partner. And in that case, even the public notice regarding the death of any partner is not necessary. The estate of the deceased partner or the legal representatives of the deceased partner would not be held liable for any act done by the firm after the date of the death of a partner. So all these points were covered under the reconstitution of the partnership firm. Now we move to the last part of the presentation, that is the dissolution of the firm. Dissolution means putting an end to the partnership between all the partners. That means closing down the firm as a whole is known as the dissolution of the firm. According to section 39, what is a dissolution? The dissolution of partnership between all the partners of the firm is called the dissolution of the firm. That means when there is an end of partnership between all the partners, there is no new partner, all the partners may have retired, or all the partners have adjured insolvent, or in case of two partners, one partner is dead. Means in any case, when there is no partnership between all the partners of the firm, we will say this the firm has got dissoluted. And at the time of the dissolution, the business of the firm would be stopped. The relation between all the partners of the firm would come to an end. Let's see the example. A, B, and C were partners in a firm. After some time, A died and the firm was closed. In this case, the firm is dissolved and the relation between partners has come to an end. The death of the partner automatically dissolves the firm unless there is a contract to contrary. Means in this case, if B and C has the contract to contrary, that means they want to continue with the firm, they could. But in absence of the contract, the firm would automatically get dissolved. Means there would be no partnership relationship between B and C too. Now how the partnership is being dissoluted, it there is a if there is a change of partners and not the extension of relationship, the firm as a whole is not closed down, the relation between some of the partners come to an end, or remaining partners continue to carry on the business of the firm. So in all the cases the partnership firm would be dissolved. So let's see the example. A, B and C were partners in a firm. There was an agreement between them that the firm shall not be dissolved on the death or insolvency of the partner. There was a contract to contrary. After some time, A was declared as insolvent. In this case, firm as a whole is not dissolved. Only the partnership between A, B, and C is dissolved, because only A is being adjudged as insolvent. B and C can continue the firm as there was a contract between them, that the firm would not be dissolved on the death or insolvency of a partner. How the firm can be dissolved, that means there are various modes of dissolution of a firm. There are two types of modes. One is with the intervention of the court, second is without the intervention of the court. Under with the intervention of court, we will discuss by consent of all the partners, by contract between the partners, compulsory dissolution, dissolution on the happening of certain contingencies, dissolution by notice. Without the intervention of court, we will cover insanity of a partner, permanent incapacity of a partner, misconduct of a partner, persistent breach of agreement, transfer of interest, perpetual losses in business, other just and equitable grounds. Let's discuss these points in detail. First, we will start with the intervention of the court. So, first under this is dissolution by consent of all the partners. When all the partners are agreeing that they don't want to continue with the partnership business, with the consent of all the partners, the court may allow for the dissolution. In this case, the whole property would be divided as per the partnership deed, as per the terms of the partnership deed, and all the partners of the partnership would come with the consent that the whole business of the partnership should be closed and the partnership would be dissolved. Second, dissolution by contract between the partners. If there is some express contract between the partners, that means let's say after 2 years it would be over, or there is express contract between the partners that with the admission of the partner once the firm would be dissolved, or some any type of contract may be there between the partners, and with that with effect of that agreement the partnership firm would be dissolved. Third one is the compulsory dissolution. Let's suppose the all of the partners are being adjudged as insolvent by the court. So in that case, the firm would be compulsorily dissoluted, and the business of the firm has become unlawful due to any reason. If something happened and the business of the firm is now become unlawful, so in that case, there would be compulsory dissolution of the partnership firm. Let's see the example. A and B were getting on the business of importing sugar from certain countries. Subsequently, the import of sugar was banned by the government. In this case, the firm is dissolved as the business of the firm has become unlawful. Dissolution on the happening of certain contingencies. Let's say some kind of certain emergency, certain contingencies has been arrived. So due to all those certain contingencies, the firm can be dissolved. In this, first one can be the expiry of fixed term. Let's say there was a contract to make a building, or there was a contract for 5 years to run a particular partnership business. With the with the over of the 5 years, with the over of term of 5 years, the partnership firm will automatically get dissolved. Or on completion of a adventure or undertaking, as I said, there was a contract between the partners to make a building. Once the building is complete, the partnership firm would be dissolved. Let's see the example. A and B, two contractors entered into a partnership for the construction of a bridge. The construction of bridge was completed within 6 months. In this case, the firm is dissolved on the completion of the bridge because the partnership was made for a particular adventure or for particular undertaking. Next, on the death of a partner, so it is by the law that when any partners get dead, the partnership firm automatically dissolves. In contract of contrary, they may continue. Insolvency of a partner, when any partner has got insolvent by the operation of the law, the existing firm of the partnership would get automatically dissolved. But there is an exception in case of death and insolvency both. They, if there is some contract to contrary, they may continue with the partnership. Next, dissolution by notice. If the firm wants to dissolve themselves, they may give a notice, but this is possible only when there is a when the partnership firm is at will. At will means where the duration of the firm is the uncertain. Means it is at the will of the partners till the time they want to continue with it, they can. And once they find it that they don't want to continue with the firm, they can skip with it. Notice of intention should be in writing and signed by all the partners. Yes, this is a very important point, that all the partners must sign their intention that they want to dissolve the firm, and this contract, this agreement must be in writing and all the partners should sign it. The notice should be clear and served up on all the partners, and the firm is dissolved from the date mentioned in the notice. So let's see the example. A and B were partners in a firm. The partnership deed provided that the firm can be terminated by mutual agreement only. A gives a notice of dissolution to B. It was held that firm cannot be dissolved by the notice of dissolution as the firm is not at will. The mode of dissolution is given in the partnership deed. That means partnership deed has mentioned that the firm can only be terminated by the mutual agreement. Now in this example only A wants to dissolve, so this is not the right mode of dissolution of the partnership firm, because here the notice would not serve the purpose. Now let's discuss the second category, that is a dissolution with the intervention of the court. When the court enters into the compulsory dissolution of the firm, one is the insanity of the partner. If any partner of the partnership firm has become insane, or the legal representative of the insane partner has filed the suit for the dissolution of the firm, so in that case the firm would be dissoluted. So in this case the order of the court are the must. Once the court orders that because of the insanity of a partner the partnership firm should be dissolved, it would be dissolved by the immediate effect. Second is permanent incapacity of a partner. Due to some mental or physical illness, if some partner is unable to work with the partnership firm, the partnership firm can be dissolved. Let's see the example. A, B, and C were carrying on a motor spare parts business in partnership. Subsequently, A lost his eyes, both eyes, in an accident. In this case, the firm is not automatically dissolved. B or C may file a suit for the dissolution of the firm. That means here A has become the permanently incapable to run with the business because he has lost his eyes. But here B and C, the other two partners, may file a suit for the dissolution of the firm. Third point is misconduct of a partner. If any partner is found the guilty of misconduct during the normal course of the business, the court may order for the dissolution of the firm, but before giving the order the court must be satisfied that this particular act should be considered as the misconduct, and on that misconduct the court can allow for dissolution, and that misconduct should definitely be relating which can affect the business of the firm. This may be regarding gambling by a partner, conviction of a partner, traveling without ticket, breach of trust, adultery by one partner with the wife of the another partner. Means all these cases must will be affecting the business of the firm and are considered as misconduct by the court, and all these cases the court can allow for the dissolution of the firm. Let's see the example. A and B were carrying on a banking business in partnership. He had committed adultery with several women in the city, and his wife has left him on this ground. B applied to court for the dissolution, but court rejected on ground that it does not affect the business of the banker. That means the wife of B has left him, but it is not affecting the wife of A has left him, but this is not affecting the business of the partnership firm. The court was not satisfied on this ground and did not declared it as a misconduct made by the partner. So in this case, the partnership firm cannot be closed, cannot be dissolved. Next is persistent breach of agreement. If any partner has willfully or persistently commits a breach of agreement which is affecting to the affairs of the business, which is regarding the management of the affairs of the business, this would lead to the dissolution of the firm. Or any partner is during the conduct of the business is performing in such a way that other partners are finding it difficult to carry on the business with him, and the conduct of partner which destroy the mutual confidence between the partner would give the sufficient ground for the dissolution of the firm on the ground of persistent breach of agreement. Again, the quarreling between the partners, refusal to meet or matters of the business, taking away the books with him at home. Means there are so many examples which make the ground that on basis of which a court may order for the dissolution of the firm. Next, transfer of interest. When a partner transfer the whole of his interest or share to a third party, means the partner has transferred his whole interest, his whole share to some another person. That means there would be reconstitution of the partnership firm, and for that purpose the old partnership firm is to be dissoluted. Next is perpetual losses in business, because every business is being run with the motive of earning the profits in a business. But once this motive is not being achieved, this objective is not being achieved, firm is continuously getting the losses. And in case of losses, this is not possible to run the business, then in that case, court may order for the dissolution of the firm. In this case, in case of losses, even the firm can be dissoluted before the expiry of the fixed period of partnership. Let's say if there was a contract between the partners to run the business for a fixed period of 2 years, and during the first year the firm is having the heavy losses, and it's not possible for the partners to run with that business for 2 years. That means even before the expiry of that fixed period of partnership, the court may order for the dissolution of the firm. So next, these were the modes of the dissolution. Next, let's read the consequences of dissolution of a firm. Once the firm is being dissoluted, what are the consequences? One, liabilities for the acts done after dissolution. Because at the dissolution, every firm has to give the public notice regarding the dissolution, and so after that public notice, no firm would be liable. But this principle will not applied in case of deceased partner or insolvent partner or a retiring dormant partner. In all these three cases, there is no need of giving the notice to the public that on these basis the firm is going to be dissoluted, and all in other cases without serving a public notice the firm would remain liable. Second, liability to account for personal profits earned after dissolution. If the firm after the dissolution of the firm, some profits are being some profits are being there, so that must be divided. All the partners have the liability for that they should clearly distribute those profits. Rights of partner after dissolution of a firm. Rights to have business wound up after resolution means every partner has the right that it may realize the assets of the firm for payment of the debts and liabilities out of the funds raised by the realization of the assets. And in that case, every partner has right. He is entitled to have the property of the firm utilized in payments of its debts and liabilities. He is entitled to have the surplus, if left, to be distributed among all the partners according to the terms of the partnership deed. Right to have the premium returned on premature dissolution of a firm. If any partner had sum of money to hold partner as a premium on his admission, so that partner has a right to get it back. And if the firm is dissolved before the expiry of fixed period, new partner has the right to get that premium back. Next is right to restrain partners from the use of firm's name or firm's property. Once the firm is dissoluted, the partners cannot use the firm's name or firm's property in future transactions. Let's discuss the case of Rajendra K. Sharma versus Rajendra K. Sharma. The affairs of a firm were being wound up. One of its partners attempted to lease out firm's property to a third person without the consent of the other partners. The court restrained him from doing so as it has the instance of other partners too. So, this was all about the topic that was the partnership laws part 2, in which we have discussed doctrine of implied authority, means any act which is being done by the partner and which can make the partnership firm bound or liable to pay the debts to the third party is under the implied authority of a partner. Liability of a partner, liability of the firm and its partner to third party, that means for all the wrongful acts, etc., the partners on the firm would remain liable. Next, we have covered the reconstitution of the partnership firm. When a new partner is being admitted with the consent of all the partners, it is admission. When any partner wants to get out of the business, he has to give the notice, or he may retire according to the terms of the partnership deed. This is a retirement. Generally, no partner can be expelled from a partnership business, but in certain circumstances, if it is being done, this should be with the consent of all the partners. Insolvency of a partner includes the court orders. When the court adjudged any partner as an insolvent, it would be insolvency of a partner, and it would automatically dissolve the partnership firm too. Death of a partner will also include the dissolution of the firm on the compulsory basis in absence of contract of contrary. And at last, we have discussed about the dissolution of the firm, in which we have covered the two modes of dissolution, with the intervention of court and without the intervention of the court. So this is all about the partnership law part 2. Thank you so much.